What's up, YouTube family? MLB has announced a new enforcement policy on foreign substances, and I'm going to run you through a whole list of my thoughts on the issue. So if you would like to hear that, you're going to need to hit that subscribe button right now because this video is for subscribers only. So go ahead and do that, give you a second to do it, and let's jump in. So it's a firm belief of mine that it's very easy for everyone to criticize decisions. Just off the bat, this is wrong, that's wrong, poke holes in it. But it's a lot harder to talk about what is right with the decision and propose actual solutions. So the first thing I wanted to do is talk about what is right about what MLB has proposed. All right, so the first thing that I have here on my list, I normally don't write lists out for videos, I just kind of give you my thoughts as I think of them. But I think this is an important issue to have a nice logical list of things. So I wrote a list out on my phone. The first thing that MLB did right is they needed to level the playing field. They had to level the playing field in some way. And in order to understand why they needed to level the playing field and why it's an issue now that it hasn't been in the past, you need to think about foreign substance over the history of the game in this context. Before about 2014, we didn't have a way to really measure spin rate. We had pitch FX, which kind of did it, but it didn't measure it directly. And then you had TrackMan that came along that measured the actual spin rate of the ball directly. Once they started measuring the spin rate of the ball directly, we could then look at performance of hitters against pitches that spun at different RPM. So on a fastball, for instance, if a fastball spins between 2,000 and 2,200 RPM, what is the performance against those fastballs versus if it spins between 2,400 and 2,600 RPM. Became very clear that the more spin that is imparted to the ball, the more potential there is for movement. And so the ball moves more than the hitter is used to seeing. And so it's a performance benefit to spin the ball faster, or it can be a performance benefit to spin the ball faster. Prior to that time in the mid-20 teens, people used grip enhancers all the time, but they used them for different purposes. They used them to get a grip on the ball. They used them to get less of a grip on the ball for throwing a split finger, maybe a spitball, something like that, where the ball would behave unnaturally in the air. They would put foreign substance on the ball in a glop of something or whatever so that the ball wasn't round, so when it was moving through the air, it would kind of tumble like an oblong basketball or something and move differently. But no one was using grip enhancers to spin the ball faster because spinning the ball faster gave you a performance benefit. No one really knew or understood that, and if they did, it was very, very few people. It was a select few, and it wasn't a league-wide issue. However, when TrackMan came along, now all the teams have this data, and all teams can see the same trends, and they can say, wow, people who spin the ball faster are more effective. They have more potential. Okay, well, how do we make our pitchers spin the ball faster? Oh, you can use this sticky stuff and that will help. So it went from doing something to get a grip on the ball, which is your traditional, sweat and rosin, sunscreen and rosin mixture, stuff like that, to other stuff, the pine tars, the pelicans, the spider tacks, the firm grips, the gorilla glues, the gorilla snots, on down the line. There's a whole host of them. So it's important to understand why this is now an issue and how it's different than what the issue has been in the past. So that's the first thing, is MLB needed to level the playing field because some people are now using grip enhancers as performance enhancers versus just to get a grip on the ball. And they're two very different things. The second thing that they got right here is they needed to have a standard procedure that are implemented, or a standard set of procedures that are implemented every single game. You can't have the manager of a team having to ask the umpire to go check the opposing pitcher. And that's currently how it is. Until this new rule goes into place, the umpires aren't allowed to come out and check the pitcher unless a manager asks them to go do so. Now the problem with this, and this has been the problem that's been going on for ages, is if I'm a manager, I'm not going to ask the umpires to go check the opposing pitcher because then their manager is going to ask the umpires to come check my pitchers. And my pitchers might be using stuff, they might not. Either way, I don't want to get into that battle. And it wasn't really that big of an issue because, again, people weren't using it as a performance enhancer. So you need to have a standard procedure that is implemented every single game, that's just a rule that becomes part of the game, and that way it's even across the board and a level, fair playing field for everybody. So I think they got that right. Starters are going to be checked twice per start coming off the field. They're going to check your hands, your wrists, your glove, your hat, your belt, anywhere else the umpire deems necessary. Every reliever will be checked either when they are removed from the game or when the inning is over that they are pitching. They'll be checked in the same way. And if it's deemed that you have sticky substance on you or some sort of foreign substance, you'll be suspended you'll be kicked out of the game and suspended for 10 games with pay. So they at least got the procedural, like having a standard procedure, correct. Now, I disagree with the actual procedure itself, and we'll talk about that in a second when we get into what they got wrong and why. But the third note I have here is it just can't be left to teams and managers to enforce anything because it's going to be haphazard at best. Managers aren't going to want to do it. And so you're going to have some teams that are like, oh, I know their manager. He's not going to do it. I'm going to use foreign substance this game. And that's how it's been. And you can't have that. If you're going to enforce the rule, you have to have a standard set of procedures. And they did that well. Things they got wrong. And this is actually a much longer list. I'm sure many of you won't be surprised about that. But this is the thing that they got wrong. The first thing that they got wrong for me, the most important thing they got wrong is they told teams in the beginning of the year for the last 3 or 4 months that they weren't going to do anything different, that there was going to be no rule changes, that there was going to be no enforcement changes, and just to have pitchers continue to behave and act as they always have. They were just going to collect baseballs, do some research on it, and then at the end of the season, they were going to discuss rules with the Players Association in the collective bargaining agreement, and there would be new rule sets, new enforcements for 2022 season. That's how it should be handled. That's not how it's being handled. You have players that go into an off season with a certain set of rules. They practice. They either throw a lot or they don't, or they do whatever their routine is. They get to spring training. They practice under a certain set of rules and understanding of what they are. They use spring training to get used to how the ball feels in their hand, to condition their arm, to get used to how to sequence their pitches to get hitters out, and on down the line. There's many things, but they have this long ramp-up period to get used to how the ball is, how their mechanics feel, how their body feels, etc., before you hit live competition when the intensity goes sky high. And this brings me to my second point, which is player safety is not being taken care of here. You have all of a sudden a 2-week span where you go from saying for 4 months, do everything the same, build up the exact same way, use the same stuff, no one's going to check, we've told umpires not to go out and check, we're just collecting data, this is what's being communicated to all 30 teams, and now you're saying, oh, you have 2 weeks to completely change what you've been doing and do something new. Now, a lot of you are going to say, well, if you weren't cheating in the first place, then you wouldn't have to deal with it. So good for you. They should implement it immediately because if you're cheating, you should be caught. Now, if a rule is on the books and MLB is telling you they are not going to enforce the rule, is it really a rule? And I had this conversation with the league many times. If you're not going to enforce the rule, if there is no penalty, if you are saying this is on the books, but we aren't going to look at it, and you don't look at it at all, and the players know that they could be better with it than without it, then you can't say that it's a rule, and you can't call those players cheaters because the rule is there, but the enforcement is not there. Now, I made this mistake in the past because I mistakenly thought that MLB cared about the rule and just didn't know what was going on. I eventually, through conversations with them, realized that they just didn't care about the rule at all. And so at that point, it was very clear that this is the situation. MLB does not care. They're not going to enforce it. So now players are put in the position where you either use a substance and are better, but it's technically against the rules, or you don't use a substance and are worse, but you're paying attention to a rule that MLB doesn't actually care about. So that's just to clear that up. But back to player safety. Now you have 2 weeks for players to get used to throwing in a certain way. Now, let's talk anatomically a little bit. Let's just talk, I'm going to try to simplify it. It's a lot more complicated than this, but to give you a basic understanding of how this could affect pitcher health specifically. If I have a ball that is stuck to my fingers and I can hold it like this, I can hold it with a flat hand, I don't have to grip that ball very hard for it to stay in my hand because it's sticky. So there's adhesion and the ball doesn't fly out of my hand. So I can be very relaxed, I can go through my arm path, and then at the end, when the forces are high, my hand is going to contract, stabilize my wrist, stabilize my elbow, all those muscles contract, and then I let go of the ball, and that's the throw. That is safe because your arm is relaxed, and then it tenses up at the appropriate times in the appropriate sequence to protect the elbow. Those are forearm muscles, bicep, tricep. Those all help stabilize the elbow and protect you from UCL or flexor strain or pronator or whatever the case is. That's how it has to happen. Now, if you take that same situation and you take the tack off the ball, and now the ball can just slip out of my hand, well, I have to have a different tension on the ball to hold that ball in my hand. If I hold it with the exact same tension that I did with sticky stuff on my hand, and I go to do my arm action, the ball will fall out of my hand. It will rotate in my hand. My grip on the ball will change in some way. So now I have to squeeze the ball harder. Now I have more tension in my forearm, more tension in my wrist, so it disrupts how my arm has been conditioned to throw the ball for the last 8 months since the offseason began, since throwing programs began. Now, does that cause injury? It's impossible to say because injuries are so complex that you can't pinpoint one thing or another thing that definitively 100% caused an injury. However, conditioning yourself to do one thing and then immediately stopping and doing something else surely isn't the way anyone prepares for activity. And it's not the best way to go about it. For instance, you would not sit on the couch for 6 weeks and then immediately go run a marathon. You'd be screwed. You would not run 3 miles every single day and then one day just decide you're going to run a marathon. There has to be some sort of build-up and conditioning there. And MLB changing the rules in the middle of the season is not allowing players to have the proper build-up and conditioning. Now, I said MLB changing the rule, and this is a little technicality that probably should be discussed. MLB is not changing any rules. They're simply saying they're going to enforce a rule that's already on the books. The Players Association and the league have a collective bargaining agreement. Those two sides have come together and agreed that this is the penalty and these are the rules of engagement. There's no foreign substance and whatever else. It's all outlined in the collectively bargained agreement. So MLB is not technically changing a rule. What they are doing is saying, we've never enforced this rule, and now we are going to enforce this rule. So they don't have to go get permission from the Players Association because the rule itself is already agreed upon and has been in the collective bargaining agreements. Let's see, point number 3. There's a lack of clarity on what sticky substances are, okay? And for all of you on Twitter that can't think in nuances, yes, there's a very big difference. Sticky is not sticky. All right, like you can't just say, well, if it's sticky, and if it's not, it's not. What constitutes sticky? Because I can put rosin on my hand with sweat, and if I mix it together correctly, I can hold a baseball just like this. But if you brush your hand against my hand, it does not feel sticky. You would not have residue on your hand. It wouldn't be gluey. However, if I press my fingers together and then open them up, or I squeeze my hand together and then open it up, my skin will stick to itself. If I press my hand against my other hand, my skin will stick to itself. So if you're pressing on the finger, it's sticky. If you're sliding on the finger, it's not sticky. And sweat and rosin is completely legal. You can't tell me I can't sweat, and you're telling me I can use the rosin bag to mix with the sweat to keep my hand dry so I can throw. Just so happens it can get very sticky. So is that now illegal? So if my hand is sticking to itself Is that considered sticky? Okay, then what's the next step? Well, if I have some sunscreen on, let's say it's a day game and I have sunscreen on and my sweat is dripping down my hand, dripping down my forearm to my hand. It is now mixed with sunscreen. I get some rosin to dry my hand off. I rub the ball up. Now there's a mixture of sunscreen, sweat, and rosin on the ball, and it can get a little stickier. Is that illegal? You can't tell me I can't wear sunscreen. So what is the pitcher supposed to do in that situation? Call someone out to the mound and say, hey, I think my hand is too sticky. Can you please, I'm using all the legal substances that are here, but I think my hand is a little sticky. Can you clean my hand off? Or how's a pitcher supposed to know what is too sticky and what is not too sticky? There's no standard here. It's completely nebulous. There's no definitive answer to what is sticky and what is not sticky. And that's something they need to figure out. It cannot be based on what the umpire thinks is sticky, because one umpire might think one thing and the next umpire might think something completely different. So you have to have a standard of what is sticky. You have to have clarity on what is sticky. And it can be anything. Have a piece of paper, and if you press your hand to the piece of paper and it sticks to your hand, it's sticky, and if not, not. Okay, at least we have something that we can define. This is sticky and that is not sticky. Not saying that's the best way to do it, but you have to have some sort of definition by which the umpires are looking for this stuff. Okay? Here's an example. What if I told you cops are not going to use radar guns anymore to determine speeding tickets? All right? They're just going to look at traffic going by and they're going to say, yep, that's speeding and that is not speeding. Okay. Well, now you're going to take all the cops that have seen traffic move before and you're going to take them out of the force and you're going to put all new cops in that have never watched traffic flow before. And you're going to give them no radar gun and you're going to say, you'll know speeding when you see it. So now the cop is supposed to sit there and watch traffic and say, okay, that's 20 miles an hour below the speed limit, not speeding. That's 35 miles an hour at the speed limit, not speeding. And that is 40 miles an hour. That is 70 miles an hour. And those two are over the limit, so they're speeding, when they have no context of what speeding is because they've never watched traffic and they have no objective measurement to tell them how fast the car is going. This is the same situation that umpires are in now. Umpires have never been trained as to what sticky is and isn't. And now they're being asked to enforce stickiness with no measure of what sticky is or isn't. There's no objectivity to it. It's all subjective. And again, you might say, well, they'll know what sticky is and isn't, just don't cheat. If I can hold a ball like this with just sweat and rosin, then is that cheating? Because both of those are legal. And the rosin is there to remove the sweat from my hand so it can dry out so I can throw the ball so it doesn't slip out of my hand. So if I mix sweat and rosin, and then an umpire feels my hand and is pressing on it and is like, oh wow, that's sticky, 10-game suspension, how is that fair? But if the umpire presses on the sweat and rosin and is like, no, you're fine, then what if I have sweat, sunscreen, and rosin on my hand? Okay, no, you're fine. One crew says you're fine. One crew might say, nope, that's the line. The mixture of sunscreen there, not okay. But the crews might say, okay, both of those are fine. Okay, well now what if I put a little bit of firm grip spray on my hand underneath before I have the sunscreen, sweat, and rosin mixture? Now are you going to say, okay, that's too sticky? And like, where does it end? Because there's no objectivity to what is too sticky and what is sticky in the first place and what isn't. So we need to have some definition on what is and isn't sticky. There has to be some sort of objectivity to it. The next point is umpires now have complete sole discretion over player suspensions. And I'm not going to accuse any umpires of doing this, and I would hope this wouldn't be the case. I don't think it's going to be the case. However, imagine for a second that a pitcher's on the mound arguing balls and strikes. This is something that umpires are very sensitive to. You try to tell them, hey, that's a strike. No, it wasn't. I'm calling balls and strikes. You play the game. Like, there'll be yelling matches between pitchers and umpires. So if you're out there arguing balls and strikes and you come over after the inning and the umpire behind the plate is supposed to check you, even if you have nothing on your hands, like right now, my hands are completely dry. They don't stick to anything. If the umpire goes, your hands feel sticky to me, you're out of here. Well, that's 10 games. I have no appeal process. I can't go back in the future, a minute later, an hour later, a day later, a week, a month. I can't go back and say, my hands were not sticky in that moment and I can prove it. It's just solely based on what the umpire thinks. So if the umpire decides that he thinks your hand is sticky, then you're suspended for 10 games. That's what's in the rule book. But there's no appeal process. MLB's not making the suspension. You're giving all the power there to the umpires. You're putting them in a very bad position because now they're supposed to enforce a rule that they've not been trained to enforce, and they're supposed to eject people based on their subjective understanding of what they think is sticky and isn't, when you haven't even given them the opportunity to feel what sunscreen and rosin mixture feels like. What does sweat and rosin feel like? What does spider tack feel like? What does firm grip spray feel like? What does Gorilla smell like? They haven't been trained in any of these things. So you're putting the umpires in a terrible position, and you're putting the players in a terrible position because there's no recourse. If I use sweat and rosin and an umpire deems that my hand is sticky, I'm going to get suspended, and that's not fair. You can't have that be going on. So you have to have some objectivity to it, and the umpires now are in a bad position because they're the sole discretion. It's under their sole discretion whether I'm suspended or not, twice a game at least. Oh, let's see. What's next on my list? Okay, the last thing I have on my list in this area is the balls are slick, all right? For those of you who haven't felt what a Major League ball feels like out of the package, it's pretty slick. Like, you take it out, you can slide your hand over it, like there's no sort of tack, it's very slick. And the procedure for that right now is they will get a brand new baseball, they will take a certain mud, Mississippi mud that's been going on for however many years, and they will take that mud, put it on the baseball, and they will rub it up so it has a little bit of moisture and a little bit of mud and a little bit of like texture to it. The problem is mud dries. It becomes dust. That's when all the moisture leaves, it becomes dust. So if these balls sit for X amount of time, they become dusty and chalky. So now you have a slick baseball and even slicker, like dusty substance in between, and you're supposed to then throw these with no tack on the ball or your hand. This is why pitchers would use a mixture of rosin and sunscreen, because it would give them a little bit of feeling on their hand. They could rub some of the mud off of the ball so that they had a little bit of tack and they could throw the baseball. It's 2021. We need to get rid of this process of rubbing mud on the baseball. It's antiquated, it makes no sense, it doesn't work. Like, get rid of it. I'm not going to say change the baseball. Everyone argues about changing the baseball, and the baseball is different this year than last year, and it's whatever. Everyone competes on the same playing field with that, okay? We get a baseball and we throw it, and it either benefits us some or it benefits the hitter some or whatever, but everyone's using it, so that's all that matters. It's a fair playing field. But with rubbing mud on the baseball, like, it's not going to be a fair playing field. The balls are always rubbed a little bit different. Sometimes the balls are rubbed immediately before the game. Sometimes the balls are rubbed 2 months ago. They've just been sitting in a ball bag back there, and they get rolled out to the game. Those are going to be super chalky. Like, let's just standardize this. You can't be using mud on the baseball. You certainly can't be telling pitchers, we're going to take away every single bit of tack that you have on your fingers in the middle of a season, but we're not going to give you a strategy by which to grip the ball, okay? Let me give you an example here. I don't sweat very much on my fingertips. Some people sweat a tremendous amount on their hand, okay? Those are two ends of the spectrum. For guys who sweat a lot, they're going to have to use a lot of rosin to just get rid of the sweat so that the ball isn't soaked when they throw it. But if their sweat happens to react with rosin and get very sticky, what is that player supposed to do? If his hand is now going to be deemed sticky, because again, I can hold a baseball like that with just sweat and rosin, all right? Players whose hands are very dry, like mine, when you go to a place like Colorado or Arizona where there's no moisture in the air, well, my hands are very, very slick, and the baseball slips out of my hands very easily when it's dry. In Arizona, it's terrible during spring training unless you use some sort of moisture. But if I use any sort of moisture and the rosin, now my hands get sticky. Am I going to get suspended 10 games? We don't have an answer to this because MLB hasn't defined it. So you got to just give make a solution where the balls are a little bit tacky so that players don't have that problem and it can be uniform instead of being rubbed with mud like it has been for 200 years now or whatever. And this brings me to the last part of the video that I wanted to go over, which is solutions. Very easy to point out problems, a lot harder to point out things that are good about it, but it's even more difficult to point out potential solutions. So this is what I think should happen. If I were running things, this is the basis, this is where I would start. Number one, you have to wait till the offseason to implement anything. It's not fair to implement something middle of the season and put player safety at risk. We've already seen Tyler Glasnow get hurt, and he firmly believes that it's because he stopped using sunscreen and rosin because he was afraid of a 10-game suspension. He's trying to play by the rules, and this changed his feel and how hard he had to grip the ball, and that's why he got hurt. It's not just him. I've heard that sentiment echoed from multiple pitchers that I've talked to on my team and on other teams in the league. They feel like if you change the tack on the ball, it's going to change my grip and my elbow feels different. My shoulder feels different. I don't know if that's what happened to Shane Bieber. I don't know. I haven't heard anything about that situation, but it might have been. I don't know if that's really what happened with Tyler. He seems to think it is, and Tyler's a very articulate and very smart guy. So I'm inclined to believe him. It's going to happen to other people. Another thing that's going to happen is the finger strength that it takes to throw a baseball with tack on it versus without tack on it is going to be different. So don't be surprised if later in the year you see some people with weird ligament injuries in their fingers. Look out for it. It's probably coming. So number one, you got to wait till the offseason so players have a full offseason and spring training to ramp up and to get used to the rules that we're going to be playing by. Number two, you have to get a sticky ball situation figured out. You got to put some tack on the ball. If you're going to take all the tack off of our hands, you got to put some tack on the ball. Now, this is what I think should happen. Get rid of the mud, get a little conveyor belt set up, all right? In the middle of the conveyor belt, you have a little enclosed house with some spray cans in it. The spray cans have an agreed upon substance. Let's call it Firm Grip because Firm Grip comes in a can and you can spray it. Hitters have it in the dugout. They spray it on their bat to hold the bat. It's tacky. Have a little bucket of balls over here. You dump the new balls in. They run down the conveyor belt, enter the little house. Psh, they get rotated, psh, sprayed, and they get sent out the other side of the conveyor belt into a bucket of balls. You can run that process very quickly. You can run 36 baseballs through there, no problem. This machine cannot be hard to build. I'm sure it exists somewhere for spraying a part of a car or like with spray paint or something. It can't be that hard. Get one of those in every dugout or in every stadium or whatever, and just run the balls through there every single inning. You need more baseballs? Great. We're running low. Go run another dozen. That way, the leather doesn't have to be impregnated with sticky stuff, so it doesn't get squishy. It's just a surface topical tack that when the pitcher gets the ball, they're like, oh yeah, okay, I can throw that. Great. It's legal, it's approved. Then you can check our hands. If you have anything else on our hands, whatever, you can implement all the rules, but the baseballs have some tack to them. It can't be that hard. I don't know why we haven't done it. I've been telling the league this for multiple years. Figure it out. Just build the stupid machine and it solves the whole entire problem. That's number two. Number three, then you can implement these rules after you have some tack on the ball, or if you're not gonna go that route, legalize a substance for pitchers to use. Just put pine tar on the back of the mound or something. Pine tar, Pelican, just put something back there that pitchers can use. All right, and if you're gonna do that, you legalize the substances, and then every time a pitcher walks in the dugout, there's someone there, just like they do at TSA, where they will do a swab of your backpack or your luggage to see if there's any chemicals that shouldn't be on it, and they test it. Do that every inning. Okay, you can use pine tar, rosin, and sunscreen. Those are all fine. Those are legal substances. Great. Come in the dugout, they swab your hand. Now, if there is above a certain amount of another substance on your hand, you're gone. 10 games, right? If you're gonna do that though, you have to have the chain of custody, so it has to be a third party that does the swab and does the test, and there has to be a chain of custody that's repeatable and trustable for everybody involved if you're gonna be retroactively suspending people. But that would solve a lot of the issues, in my opinion. Umpires wouldn't have to be then checking players on the field. There'd be no delays of game. And then you'd have an objective measure of if there's over X amount of substance detected on your hand in the swab, you're done. So then if you want to go use spider tack or gorilla snot or whatever else, fine, but the test is probably going to pick it up. So that would be my solution to that. But the last point, you can't have the definition of sticky being subjective. That doesn't level the playing field at all. It just throws everything up in the air, and who knows, there's going to be some umpires that have no interest in this. They come over and they go, let me see your hand. Yep, you're good. Go ahead, keep pitching. And they don't even check your hand. You're going to have some umpires that are going to be really diligent, be like, let me feel your hand, feel in between, let me look in your glove, let me inspect your, let me just look at everything. It's not going to be a fair playing field. You can't have it be subjective. You have to have an objective measurement of stickiness. Anyway, that's my proposed solution. Those are the issues that I see with what MLB has proposed or what they're going to implement, and some good things I see about what MLB is going to implement. I'm interested to hear your thoughts about this discussion, so please let me know what you think in the comments below, because this is a very unprecedented sort of rule change, scandal-ish thing going on in the middle of a season, and I'm just interested to hear what the fans think. Hopefully you got educated, hopefully you understand a little bit more. If you have any questions about anything that I said, any points that I missed, if you want clarification on anything, let me know in the comments, and I'll do my best to get some more videos up about this in the future to answer those. Anyway, hope you guys have a great day. See you in the next one.